Hello, you're listening to KPMG's Energy Exchange podcast where we explore the path to Ireland's exciting energy future. We discuss the practical things that we can do to unlock the full potential of Ireland as a major energy producer. I'm Colm O'Neill, and today I'm joined by two of my partners, Michele Connolly and Russell Smyth. Michele leads our corporate finance team and is also EMA Head of Infrastructure, and Russell leads our Sustainable Futures team, and probably fair to say been involved in every major renewables transaction that's happened in Ireland in the last 3 years. So you're both very welcome. Great to have you here. And maybe start with you, Russell, because the shift to renewables, it's been going on for some time, but it does feel like almost in the last month or so, there's been a big uptick in activity and a big move towards that renewables future.
Yeah, like renewables in Ireland has been one of our big success stories. We started really from a standing start in the 1990s, and today we've nearly 5 gigawatts of operational installed capacity across wind and solar, etc. The driver and the momentum is real, without question. It's driven really by a number of factors. First one being policy.
Yeah.
So EU is clearly a leader in the area, setting an ambition for net zero by 2050, and that's permeating through the member states. Ireland itself has set fairly robust targets for renewables, 51% decarbonisation by 2030 and net zero by 2050 as well, and renewables is certainly seen as probably the building block for that decarbonisation strategy. One of the other drivers, though, which is probably the somewhat more recent one, is economic. Renewables always relied on subsidy, and it was driven by rounds and rounds of policy and subsidy support. What's happened now is that renewables has matured to a point where it's now the single cheapest form of new generation. Studies have shown it's around 40% cheaper on average than new gas power stations. Mm-hmm. So it just makes economic sense now to deploy renewables over fossil generation.
Is that cheaper to build, cheaper to run? What are the economics of that?
Yeah, so it's looked at on a whole of life cycle. So the operational running costs of wind is nearly zero. The marginal cost of operation is nearly zero. So that free resource. So once you build the infrastructure, you get the benefit of that free resource, and you look at what's called the levelized cost of energy. The whole cost, around 40% cheaper. Some of the offshore tariffs that have been bid in GB market have been quantums cheaper. So again, just depending on maturity of location, the technology, it's just a bit of a no-brainer. And then, coupled with the acceleration in carbon taxes, 48, 50 in Ireland, going to nearly 100 in some of the EU carbon bases, that differential is just going to get stronger. And then the final component, I would say, is demand. So we have real tangible demand coming from industry. We work with a lot of big industrials. They've committed to their net zero targets. They're not interested in fossil generation. They want to buy renewables from the grid, but they also want their own generation coming for renewables. So you have this perfect storm of policy, demand, and economics.
And what's driving that shift by businesses? Because obviously there's the cost element of it, but is there anything else driving that?
I think the direction of travel has been set by policymakers. So they've made it very clear. To date, policy hasn't really bitten as being the reason why companies have gone. The legislation hasn't really forced. What it has set the direction of travel, and then it's been a lot of voluntary movement to get in front of this legislative drive. And so what we're seeing, probably the single biggest driver at the moment, is large corporates making commitments and pushing that through their supply chain. And so it's businesses that know that policy and reporting is coming. If they want to continue to supply and be an attractive part of the supply chain, they've got to start their decarbonisation journey. And so that's permeating through all levels. We've got CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, kicks in next year.
Yeah,
that's the first real legislative driver that's going to bite.
Yeah,
and that's going to be mandatory for about 49,000 firms across Europe. And when that comes in, it's just going to accelerate it further.
And that's where targets become objectives. So you can no longer just make a statement around a notional target in the future. You're going to be measured on how you're delivering.
You're going to be measured and you're going to be audited. At the moment you can say we reduced our carbon emissions by 12% last year, and to be honest, it's pretty vague. Going forward, that's going to have assurance. You're going to have a third party that is going to actually verify that. And again, that moves from this voluntary to mandatory. And again, we'll change a lot of things.
So it's economically viable now, and then coupled with that, policy is turning into not just targets, but actual measurable, auditable kind of reporting that you're going to have to complete.
Correct.
So I guess, Michele, maybe to bring you into the conversation, it's all very well to have the desire to get there and that for it to be economically viable and so on, but when you consider the scale of infrastructure that's going to have to be created, whether that's the renewable generation that's going to have to be created, whether it's the grid that's going to have to be built, it's literally billions of euro is going to need to be spent. And historically here in Ireland, we haven't been brilliant at getting projects delivered in that regard. Can you maybe give us some kind of reflections on your experience of large infrastructure projects and what we maybe need to do differently for this?
I think it depends whether you're talking about the mega scale infrastructure project or just a normal large infrastructure projects. That some of the ones that we're talking about here, they do fall into the category of mega projects. Ireland doesn't have a big tradition of doing that. We haven't been involved. We haven't done things at that scale before. So it is a bit of a learning process. The commitment from government to actually support and put the money behind it, that pays dividends and is hugely beneficial. But we also need to match that then with the process and procedures to push it through planning, for example. It's a real bottleneck, not just in the area of renewables and energy efficiency, but in any aspect of infrastructure building at the minute. We have a real problem and a real challenge. Once you get through planning, it's then down to, do we have the skills and the experience? Do we have the capacity for the mega projects? And most arms of government are now recognising that we need to bring in additional support and expertise, whether that's simply to provide additional capacity or to provide the experience of delivering things at a mega scale. Because a mega scale is not just bigger, it's immeasurably got additional challenges and risks associated with that. So there's a huge amount of focus and attention being put on that, and the will is there. But we need the policy and procedures and the bureaucracy to not actually be the impediment along the way. But it's not just about the mega projects. You do also have significant numbers of projects within the renewable journey or the decarbonisation journey that are smaller. They tend to be the high volume, low value, like electric vehicles and putting in place our electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which needs to catch up. There's a lot of initiatives in place to do that. We just need them to work faster for us. Retrofitting of our housing stock is another one. It's complicated and it's not easy. And that's why I suppose we want to make sure that anything new build coming along has properly focused on the whole ESG agenda in the first instance, so you're not retrofitting. But there's a lot of those projects that can be underway that maybe don't have the challenges of the mega projects, so that we should have dual tracking, targeting all aspects of the economy at the same time.
So it's kind of, there is that very kind of different agenda, which is those mega projects which we've not had experience of, but then, some of those micro projects that again have their own complexity because there's just so many of them. If you look at those mega projects, what are the things that are different about those that we won't have faced before in the Irish context?
Some of the aspects of that, some of it is the technical complexity, because some of these areas are new. And it's also impacting the underlying infrastructure, where take our grid capacity, for example. They're trying to any country trying to expand their grid capacity is a mega project in its own right, while you keep all the existing systems and the processes and procedures underway. So they're mega scale of programs. The risks involved are bigger. So the risk of keeping an existing grid infrastructure in operation at the same time while you're doing things to put additional capacity onto that, it just brings you into a different territory of risks. And an awful lot of that is around very, very strong identification and mitigation of risks, but an awful lot of it is very, very strong program management as you're trying to, in effect, keep lots and lots of balls in the air at exactly the same time.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the challenge is not just one of the kind of logistics of a large scale program, but there's some real new technical elements to this that will make it also a challenge.
There are, and Ireland has a fantastic skills base, and when we get on the ground, we build infrastructure very, very well.
Yeah,
you wouldn't think it always necessarily when you read the news reports, but we do have a good track record of building infrastructure, and we have great skills and ability here in Ireland. When it comes to additional areas of technical complexity, we've always shown ourselves open in the past to go, if we don't have the knowledge and the know-how, well, let's bring it in from overseas.
Yeah.
And bringing it in from overseas also then means then we're upskilling a whole generation of people in Ireland that have also proven in the past very effective at then taking that knowledge and expertise and the value add and going and exporting it at a point in time in the future. So this is a higher skill value add skill set that we're bringing in that will have plenty of work involved in the Irish economy for years to come, but also a safety valve that other countries will be crying out to get people with this sort of skills and resources into the future as well.
Yeah, because this build out is going to take decades.
Decades. It can also provide a great opportunity to try and attract back Irish talent who are working overseas.
Yeah.
Now, but be aware, I suppose, that at the same time that Ireland is on its decarbonisation journey, so is the rest of the world.
Yes.
So anybody who has the skills and expertise in this area is in high demand. And the same goes to the supply chain. Russell already mentioned that it's not just do we have the skills and expertise to manage the projects and get them on the ground and construct them, but is our supply chain ready to both support the industry, but also to take advantage of the economic opportunity that's coming down the tracks on it.
Yeah.
So take, for example, the ports. It's often talked about the capacity within our ports to be able to support the offshore developments that are going to take place.
Yeah.
There is a significant opportunity there for our ports and the hinterland surrounding them and the supply chain that feed the ports to be the hub to both develop out and build the turbines, but also then to operate and maintain of that offshore capacity going forward into the future. But at the minute, if you looked across each one of the ports in Ireland, we probably have about 4 or 5 of them who will all say they're going to be the hub for the development of the offshore industry. The reality is it needs investment in any of the ports in the Republic of Ireland to be able to cope with that. And they're all competing for that investment. That doesn't make an awful lot of sense. We'd be much better off if government identified 1 or 2 port hubs, really invested now to build out that capacity. Because it stands at the minute, we won't have the ability to service the build of those offshores from within Republic of Ireland. We'll probably have to go to Belfast to do that. So we need to do it, and we need to get that investment now.
So, like when you think about this, there's the investment in the renewable infrastructure. You've then brought it into the investment that have to take place in the grid, the investment through into micro projects as we refit people's houses, developing ports. I mean, Russell, there's just an enormous build out of infrastructure, even beyond what you might think in terms of renewables. Where is all the money going to come from?
Yeah, so the cost of the energy transition globally is going to be massive. Like it's estimated that last year about 1.4 trillion was spent on clean energy investments. Within an Irish context, we've estimated that delivering on the Climate Action Plan 21 is around 125 billion plus. And that's split across a number of categories. So the deployment of electricity, grid and renewables is around 35 billion. Mm-hmm. The building retrofit and upgrade, probably another 35 billion. And then transport's around 50 billion. This is the replacement of our vehicle fleets. So that's an awful lot of capital.
Yeah.
There is a lot of liquidity in the world, and there's a lot of investors who want to invest in renewables. So in theory, the money is there.
Yeah.
The question is, can we attract it into Ireland? Ireland generally has been successful in attracting inward investment, investing in capital. One of the points that Michele made, which is very relevant, the entire world is looking to decarbonize at the same time. And so we're competing for resources, we're competing for capital against a lot of jurisdictions. And the question is, how do we ensure that Ireland is seen as an attractive destination? We run a lot of processes, investment processes in Ireland, and even over the last year, we've run processes that are bringing the likes of Ørsted, the world's largest investor of offshore, into Ireland, the likes of Neon, a French investor, EDF. So there's a lot of international companies are coming into Ireland, and they'll be able to bring capital and resources. The question, though, is will that competition get tighter over time, and will it be harder and harder to support? So it's about the Irish government ensuring we have an ecosystem that is attractive to these investors coming in, and we're able to mobilise that global funding, because Ireland on its own, there's no way it will be able to fund the infrastructure.
And what's the impact, Russell, of government policy on people's investment decisions?
Yeah, ultimately, investors will look at the macro environment, and that macro environment is quite often driven by the policy environment that is being created by government. What investors want primarily is visibility and consistency. So they don't want policy surprises. Mm-hmm. So, our single biggest ask when we speak to government is give forward-looking policy guidance and be consistent and have no surprises. Mm-hmm. A recent example actually of what I believe was a policy misstep was in offshore and how they're treating what's called the phase 2, the second wave of offshore in Ireland. While the policy decision that's been taken, which is really a government-led identification of sites, is probably the right decision. Yeah, that policy was left ambiguous for quite a few years. We had over 70 projects being developed on the back of policy vacuum. Mm-hmm. When the government have now come out and clarified it, people have said, right, okay, we'll react. A lot have reacted badly, though, and I think it has caused some consternation amongst investors. I suspect we will lose investors who are looking at Ireland. Yeah. If that policy guidance had been given earlier, it would have probably wasted a lot of investment that's maybe was misdirected, but would have given people confidence that Ireland does not have policy surprises.
So sometimes it's not just the policy, but it's both the timing and how it's communicated can have the impact. I suppose, Michele, you have a lot of experience of working with government in the area of infrastructure and how they create an environment that's conducive to investment. What's your thoughts on what we need to do as a country to kind of create that environment that's really positive for investment in the renewable space?
Big part of it is making sure that government and the government officials are talking to and listening to the private sector. That there's always room for more to be done there. At times there's a tendency to say, well, if we make available a process or make available funding, they will come. But actually you need to reach out and be talking to the market all the time, and to recognise that Ireland's competing on a global scale to get the attention of these. That what international investment, whether it is the funders coming in or the people that are actually going to build any of this capacity that we need, what they love to see is certainty of here's the timeline, here's the programme, and that you match that certainty with delivery, so that they know if they're coming in to set up a base in Ireland, that there is going to be a programme of projects that is going to go roughly to time, not to the exact day, but I would often say to government, at least tell people if it's going to be 2023 or 2024, or ideally if it's going to be half one or half to half two of the year, so that people can see it's worth their while setting up, establishing an operation, bringing in and onboarding people, and can get that certainty. That's a big part of it for the international community.
Yeah, so certainty is so important, and you can understand what the challenge is for them, because all of these decisions are so political, and people are quite dogmatic, in particular in the energy and renewable space, on what the solution should be. So it is a difficult environment for them, but giving that certainty of timeline and when decisions will be made is so important.
It is, and then following through. So you can, once you've got the certainty of here's the decision, actually making sure that a project runs to time, and that's where the planning system will come back again. And government have done a lot and made a lot of improvements to try and make sure that they're removing blockages in the system. And given the political will that's there, they're not intentional blockages, but sometimes it can just be blockages in process, in procedure, in bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And in a way, a number of years ago, there would have been a big push to say, well, we needed additional governance over projects, which is excellent and it is absolutely needed. But you can't then let the bureaucracy and the governance impede projects such that projects fall away and level of interest fall away. You've got to get a balance, and it's all about getting a balance. And at the minute, the pendulum's probably swinging too far towards the emphasis on process, procedure, bureaucracy, and we needed to swing a little bit the other way to say, yes, but we've got to have delivery and we've got to have projects pushing ahead at the same time.
Yeah. And I guess, Russell, we've now, like, as Michelle's saying there, you know, moving from a position where, you know, you've got to get some of those processes and procedures in place, but ultimately you've got to start building. And like the scale of the prize for us here in Ireland, it is quite staggering if we were to build what the capacity is. Could you maybe just give a sense of what that opportunity looks like?
Yeah, like ultimately, you know, the scale of deployment, over the last 25 years, we've deployed about 5 gigawatts of renewables. Even between now and 2030, we're looking to deploy more than twice that.
Yeah.
So there's a big level of deployment. What are the benefits that you know can bring to the country and to society? So, you know, one, we've said that the economics of renewables, you know, in theory will drive cheaper energy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely, you know, a benefit from an economics perspective. The second one is, you know, there will be benefits for the country from just a sustainability perspective. You know, at the moment, I think it's 84% of all our energy comes from fossils, and you know that is causing air pollution. It's, you know, causing various forms of pollution. So I think we will have a cleaner and a safer environment. We're also very, very heavily dependent on imports. You know, so we don't have energy security. We are, and we saw it through the Ukraine crisis, we are just subject to the vagaries of global energy price movements. You know, the vision here, can Ireland get to a point where it is increasingly energy self-sufficient? It's able to decouple itself from that those movements, and I think that again would provide a much more stable footing for the country. But even I think the opportunity goes beyond that. So offshore is probably, you know, the most exciting opportunity. So Ireland has a fabulous resource. It has a fabulously broad coastline.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were to deploy what we need to service Ireland, but then go beyond that, we have an opportunity where we could actually deploy enough offshore wind that we could be exporting 90% of our generation, and we could become a net exporter of renewable energy. I think you've maybe seen recently an agreement signed between Germany and Ireland, you know, about the potential for exporting some of this energy, and that's not just electricity cables carrying through interconnectors. It's turning it into other forms. So it's turning that surplus electricity into green ammonia, which allows us to ship it further and wider. It's turning it into green aviation fuel. So could we actually decarbonise Ireland's aviation base on the back of the green surplus electricity from offshore wind? Could we use the green ammonia to decarbonise agriculture by displacing chemical fertilisers?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a huge resource. I think we need to obviously focus on getting what we need to service domestically, but even beyond that, Ireland could become an international exporter of green energy, and that's going to be a very valuable commodity.
And of course, the reason Germany are signing that agreement with Ireland is to service their industrial base, and there's no reason why with that level of energy generation we couldn't build our own industrial base here locally, which again will be a further benefit to the economy.
Yeah, well, we deal with an awful lot of large corporates in Ireland. A lot of the international multinationals that have based here, and you know, as we spoke about earlier, they have made commitments that they have to be, you know, net zero by, you know, 2035, 40, whatever their own commitment. They will only invest in a jurisdiction if it has an environment and a policy and the infrastructure that allows them to meet those ambitions, because if they don't, they will be unable to sell products made in Ireland.
Yeah.
So I think it's, first of all, it's probably a necessity to continue to attract inward investment. But if we can demonstrate that we have an ecosystem that will allow faster decarbonisation than competitors, it will give Ireland another, tool in its armoury of attracting
inward investment. And as you say, as those companies are starting to make decisions, these are 10, 15-year time horizons decisions that they make. So we really need to be positioning ourselves now for what could be huge prosperity for the country in years to come.
Correct.
I get, Michele, you've probably been involved in some shape or form in most of the major infrastructure deployments that have taken place. And as you say, once they've got through those early stages, we do deploy infrastructure very well in this country. What do you think are the big learnings from your experience that we should be applying to accelerate into what could be a very prosperous future for Ireland as a renewable energy centre?
Well, once we get on the ground with a piece of major infrastructure, we do have a good track record. We have a bad track record in costing the projects at the outset, and we have a bad track record in particular of making sure we've properly costed out what's the risk and contingency that's needed on projects. So you'll often see something in the paper of a project has encountered massive cost overruns and there hasn't even been a spade put in the ground. That's not a cost overrun. That's bad costing in the first place. So we kind of need to get real about that. Yeah. And government's made big efforts now to make sure that we properly put a proper price tag on a project and then measure against that. So you've got a good yardstick in the first place.
Yeah.
We've also had a tendency to have a poor form of contracting with the private sector, where we'll always talk about risk transfer. Well, trying to push all of the risk across to the private sector party doesn't necessarily incentivize a behaviour on site which is problem solving. And that's what you want, where if they put a spade in the ground and the ground isn't what they anticipated, well, then we want the focus to be on solving the problem so the infrastructure goes ahead, as opposed to have a scrap over whose fault it was.
Yeah.
And we need to improve the base of contracting. It's going to apply to all of the projects, mega and minor, as we go forward to decarbonise, to make sure we've got a form of contract that's fit for purpose, to make sure we've priced the job properly in the first place, allocated proper contingency, and then we have strong and effective management over that as we go along. They're not necessarily rocket science pieces of it, but they're the practical problems where things don't go according to plan with the development of infrastructure in Ireland.
Yeah, so it's common sense, not necessarily common practice.
Yes, I agree with that.
And so the whole theme of the podcast is about exploring the path to Ireland's exciting energy future. So I'm maybe going to just get the two of you to give me a final comment on the one or two things in a couple of sentences, the one or two things you would change if you could to give us the best chance of achieving that prosperous future.
I think one piece that I think is important, we've tended, even through this conversation, we've focused very much on electricity and onshore wind and solar. We're talking about a whole of economy decarbonisation, and renewables will be deployed in a range of forms. One of the areas that's really exciting at the moment is biomethane. So we've talked about electricity. We're done really well, 40% of our electricity from renewables. If we look at thermal, less than 5% of our thermal energy comes. So we do have to take a whole of economy. We have to find technologies that allow us to decarbonise our thermal. The retrofit of houses is an example of improving the thermal efficiency of the houses. The deployment of green hydrogen, which we now have a 2 terawatt target, deployment of biomethane, which is a 5.7 terawatt hour target, that is going to be essential. So again, make sure we don't focus on just the stuff that's seen as easier or that we have a track record in.
Yeah.
We have to keep our minds open and have a broad policy that looks at all the levers of change available to decarbonise the whole of economy. And
it's an interesting point, because for a subject that's so complex, people often have very simple solutions to it, but it's a nuanced problem, and the solutions will be equally nuanced, and we'll probably have to do a range of things to achieve the objectives that we've set out to achieve. Michele, any?
Probably two aspects, I'd say, and both potentially in very different spaces. We need to overhaul the planning system. And if we were really serious about this and really serious about our decarbonisation journey, Well, is there a second wing of An Bord Pleanála or its equivalent that should be set up that just deals with energy transition projects? I don't know if that's the right answer. But we need to seriously do something about our planning environment. Otherwise, every project is going to be beset by delays and uncertainties on delivery. Mm-hmm. The other side of it, I'd say, is we've been saying for a long time that energy transition needs to happen because we need to do that for all of the environmental benefits. But actually, we need to also have the focus on energy transition creates a massive economic opportunity for Ireland. We keep talking about the fact that we're a small, very vibrant, very strong economy with a young, educated workforce. And we have a significant opportunity now to become a world leader or very, very strong in the whole area of energy transition, generating those economic benefits to Ireland, not just in terms of decreasing our own cost of energy, which would be very welcome, but there's a massive spin-off benefits across our supply chain. And we're not focused on how do we really harness and get the benefit of that for Ireland.
Very good. Really positive conversation. And Michele, Russell, I'd like to thank you both for joining me today on KPMG's Energy Exchange podcast, where we discuss the practical things that we can do to unlock the full potential for Ireland as a major energy producer.